Good afternoon. I'm Anthony Mingy, Senior Partner with Fitch & Associates, and on behalf of the firm, welcome to our Pinnacle webinar series. Today's presentation, Beyond Chart Review, Creating a Data-Driven CQI Program, is sponsored by ImageTrend. Before we get started with today's presentation, I have a few quick reminders as usual. If you're interested in attending a Beyond the Street workshop or sending your team members, we have two upcoming opportunities. The next BTS will be held September 29th and 30th in Leavenworth, Washington. We'll also have another one November 3rd and 4th in Arnold, Missouri, which is just south of St. Louis. If you're not familiar with BTS, this is a two-day workshop for new and aspiring EMS supervisors. Key course topics include navigating conflict, problem solving, when to direct, when to coach, and when to delegate as a supervisor, just to name a few. Go to fitchassociates.com for more information or to register. Moving on to our presentation, we're very grateful to ImageTrend for sponsoring today's webinar. We also want to recognize our two partners who help us with each of our Pinnacle webinar series presentations. Our learning partner, Ninth Brain, provides support in bringing you these great sessions, and the Pinnacle webinar series is produced in cooperation with our premier media partner, EMS1. As a reminder, we'll be answering questions at the end of today's presentation. At the bottom of your Zoom window, you should see a few buttons: Chat, Raise Hand, and Q&A. The chat feature can be used to interact with your fellow attendees or presenters. If we share any links during the broadcast, we'll place them in the chat window as well. However, if you have any specific questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A button. And now I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter. Doug Butler Jr. is the Director of Clinical Services for ImageTrend. He has implemented multiple ImageTrend platforms for CVEMSA and served as data consultant for Reach Air Medical's ImageTrend system. Doug, I'm happy to hand it over to you.
Perfect. Sorry about that.
There we are.
Double.
Right. Welcome.
Myself. Perfect. So my name is Doug Butler. I'm the director of ImageTrend's Clinical and Research Services team. Licensed paramedic still, and been practicing EMS for over 19 years. A little bit about our clinical research team is we have a in-house epidemiologist, and we work with our clients, thousands of clients across the US on research, data analysis, and how we can improve their CQI programs and processes. A lot of our research is driven through our Collaborate program, which is a de-identified data lake that is an opt-in program that our clients opt into. And you can find various amounts of research and other things I'll be referencing throughout today's webinar, imagetrend.com/collaborate. So let's talk about CQI. So when we talk about chart review, I'm going to be talking about a lot of issues, a lot of surveys that we've done with our clients and how we have optimized a lot of challenges, I would say, and modernized the CQI process. And when you think about this, the definition of CQI, ultimately it is a process to improve quality of healthcare outcomes. And as we kind of look through how CQI is driven, it's really a culture of improving patients. And usually that's where we get those kind of questions from our clients is, how can I improve my CQI program? How can I get buy-in? And it's really starting with you as an organization is making it important and say, okay, CQI is, we want to improve patient outcomes. I think that's everyone across the board wants that. And everyone wants to optimize their services. And really starting with a culture of saying, hey, we can only do better is really that starting ground for that. And we developed this here at ImageTrend, and we've kind of shared this among our clients, and as we do these kind of talks across the nation, is really where does this all start? And how do I start my CQI process, and where do I really begin? And I think the first part where we always start is the identify section. And that might be the hardest part of CQI, is where do I identify an area of need? And we're going to be talking about some other methods and where traditionally people start, but really looking at your data. Your data is actually going to tell you a lot. And unfortunately, when we kind of worked with clients and did surveys, a lot of CQI managers and the CQI department is really kind of still focusing on that original, okay, I got my systems of care, I got my completion or billing process, I need to verify all these records, I'm meeting those standards. And they really don't have time for a kind of outside the box CQI project. And really trying to find that time is important. So we're going to discuss how you can identify some issues. When you start identifying things, you will go down this rabbit hole and you're going to find a lot of things. And so prioritizing those items is going to be key to really quickly and easily identify, okay, what is going to be the most achievable goal at this point? What's going to be, think about the 4 or 5 things I want to do. What should go in order? So does X have to go before Y? And really trying to identify that. Collaboration and getting buy-in from your organization. Everyone needs to see value in that CQI initiative. And this is where sometimes people struggle is, we're going to focus on this, but this may not have buy-in from the organization, may not have buy-in from the medical director or maybe your administrative staff. And really trying to get that buy-in is going to be key from the top down, that this is an important initiative. This is what we're doing to not only improve patient outcomes, but improve us as clinicians in a professional organization. Now, the next kind of area, a lot of people question me on this is, why do you have monitoring and benchmarking before you talk about education and initiating the actual process? In our eyes, if you can't monitor or set those kind of goals or identify where you are, there's really no need to go past this. Is the only way that you can actually confirm that you're making a difference is having those benchmarks, having those monitors, having that capability to say, okay, this is where we are. This is where we want to be in 6 months. This is where we want to be in a year. And one of my favorite quotes is, you can't eat an elephant in a single bite, is really taking that and setting achievable goals. If your goal is to go, okay, we want to improve our vascular access on pediatric patients. And right now we're at 34%, and we want to improve that to 74%. Setting a benchmark like that in a quarter is not really achievable, but saying, hey, we want to go from 34 to 50% in a quarter. Small chunks like that is where you'll actually achieve those goals. You're going to get buy-in from not only your leadership, but your clinicians, and recognizing and rewarding that achievement. So really establishing those monitors and benchmarks. And then the reason why we also bring this up early is setting something that is achievable. I was working with a client, like, our goal is to get 100% success rates with IVs. I don't think that's really possible. But can you say, hey, our goal is, high 90s, maybe 90%, and then document every single attempt and identifying why, or maybe identifying maybe we need to have a safer aspect. Maybe it's just not about the starting the IVs, but maybe it's no needle sticks in a year, and kind of rethinking that and changing that. So make sure the goals are achievable. And then communicate and educate. Now, there's some other layers out here that talk about communicate, about sharing the information, but very few that actually add that educate part. We thought that was important. If you're going to do this initiative well, you want to make sure you're educating to that standard. And when we kind of explore that with a lot of people, they're like, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. If you didn't need to educate, you wouldn't have this initiative. So really going there and communicating the why. My colleagues sometimes think I'm a 2-year-old because I ask that why question a lot. Is, why are we doing this? What's the benefit? What's the goal? Is all these questions are going to be key, because they're going to ask you that. And having that up front and being very transparent is going to be really how you're going to gain that trust and make these CQI initiatives go forward. Initiate and assess, always a reassessing. We're going to talk about, the plan, do, check, act here in a second. But kind of really going back in there is everything going through the process. Now, you may have to adjust your plan 3 or 4 times, may have to do additional training, but ultimately just reassessing, running that data, running those benchmarks, and you're going to get through that point. Recognizing and rewarding, one of the biggest things that really changes morale and that promotes that culture is acknowledging, hey, look, we did a great job. We improved this to this percentage. This is why it's important. And really acknowledging your top performers. Even your low performers, there's an opportunity for them to improve and reaching out and really trying to get your workforce on the same page. Transparency is key. And then that last thing is accountability, implementing those standards, making sure that everyone's aware of, hey, look, this is a new practice, this is a new policy, this is no new procedure or protocol, and making sure that everyone's moving forward on the same page. And I did reference the plan, do, check, act method. This graphic is a little bit misleading, especially as you start rolling this out and you start doing education on this process. People think it's, oh, okay, I'm gonna, we're gonna work on performing high quality CPR with no breaks. Okay, I'm just gonna go through the cycle once and then we're gonna be done. In reality, you're most likely going through this cycle multiple times, and that's fine. That's great. But to have that concept of the one and done, not really the case. You're going to constantly go through that process and then be like, okay, so we did check, we're going to act. Okay, we're having some struggles here because of our layout. Maybe we need to redo some training and talk about positioning people on each side of the patient. And maybe there's an issue with the BVM equipment that we're currently purchasing. Is constantly reevaluating, checking with your employees, checking with the clinicians, and moving forward. I was working with a client, they went through, I think, 15 iterations on just one CQI initiative, which was great because they were constantly changing, constantly improving. There's something called the Hawthorne effect. And if you've not heard of this, this is a great thing to keep in mind. So basically it was a study and it was looking at employees. And what they find is employees tend to decrease their performance in an area that they did improve after 3 to 6 months. So if you guys were very focused on cardiac arrest, if there's no follow-up or there's no kind of repeat of that data, you're going to see a decline in performance in that topic in about 3 to 6 months. So now that you kind of had those benchmarks and those measurements and those milestones, those should be a part of your monthly or quarterly reporting. So people know that, hey, look, this is still important. Bring it up on if you're doing newsletters, or if you're doing a town hall meeting, make sure people know that this is still an area that we're focusing on, and you're going to see that performance maintain. And it's kind of interesting. I would challenge you to go back and look at your own data and think of a CQI initiative that you did and look at that data about 6 to 7 months later, and you probably will see a decline if you did not follow up with that. And that's that constant need to say, okay, hey, this is important, and reiterating that to your employees and give them the why. And I love this graphic personally, because if you don't add standards, protocols, procedures, you're just going to go back downhill. So as you go through each improvement cycle, or you do a new project or initiative, make sure that you add a protocol or a standard or a policy that really reiterates, hey, this is our practice. And so that you're not going back downhill, you keep on moving forward and you're maintaining those standards. So we did a survey a couple years ago, it was pre-COVID, and we asked our agencies, what type of CQI reviews does your organization conduct? And we actually said ongoing is that kind of key, is not these ad hoc ones. And it was interesting to get those responses back. And I want you to kind of think about your organization. What CQI initiatives do you have, reoccurring, ongoing ones that you do all the time? And I bet you your list is probably going to match their list. So the most common ones was random audits. And we found that most agencies do a random audit between 10% to 40% of chart reviews. Just completely random, people do them, and they get feedback. Your system of care, so cardiac arrest, trauma, stroke, STEMIs, those are very common. People say, these are the ones we're focusing on. We also heard a lot of new employer reviews, new paramedics. Hey, look, we review all the records for the first 3 months, and then we do a random audit 6 months and 9 months. And then the last one we heard a lot was infrequent skills. Now, I bet you guys came up with one that's not on this list. These were the top 5. I'm going to show you the number 1 here in 1 second. So think about your organization. Think about what other types of CQI reviews that you do, or some kind of review of those records. And the number 1 kind of what we heard and we got back, and this is pretty consistent, is post-incident completion assessment or a billing review. So it's a review of the record prior to going to billing, or it's a review to make sure everything is complete. So there's signatures, there's 2 set of vital signs, kind of that traditional method that you see. And I wasn't really shocked to see this. I'm still shocked that this is still number one. We kind of do the mini survey periodically at our annual user conference, and we ask people and we say, okay, can you give us your top 5? And this is one that still remains on that top list. And we're like, there has to be a way to move past this. Can we automate this? Is there a better way? Can you free up your time to focus on more initiatives or something outside of those kind of realm? As if we go back to the systems of care, they're important. No one's arguing that one, but is there a way that we can shift this? When we ask questions about the infrequent skills, a lot of people, well, I'm required to look at those. They're part of our regulatory requirements. And it's like, okay, we get that. Is there a way that we can add in some other areas? Because this is a very narrow scope. Think about a funnel. We're really kind of funneling in our CQI. Is there a way that we can use data to expand this out and really look at a bigger picture? And I'm going to give you an example of that bigger picture. We worked with a client. I was on site and we were talking about something else, and we were looking at some data, and we went down this rabbit hole that turned in about 6 hours. And it was, I think, was amazing. They had fun. But I'm going to give you an example of where, automating a lot of this process, and it gives you time to look at other things. So this image is actually from my phone. I had this saved. I'll be the first one to admit I have a problem. I don't ever delete my photos. This photo is from 2012, March 23rd. This is a stack of CQI paperwork that I had that I needed to complete that was sitting in front of my command vehicle. And there's something that I was doing throughout the day. But you can see that it was a bunch of paper we printed out. We probably killed a lot of trees. But you can see as we kind of go through it, on the left-hand side, very generic. Times documented was the initial blood pressure, vital signs. Was it a manual blood pressure? That was our standard. Were vital signs taken every 5 to 10 minutes? Was there a working diagnosis? This was version 2 of NEMSIS, so it wasn't really called a primary impression at that point. Was the treatment appropriate? Very generic, okay? Was the 12 lead acquired and documented? Was the narrative clear and concise? And then evaluated comments. Now, you can notice it's a yes, no checkbox. We didn't aggregate these responses. We didn't transpose them. I think at some point, someone put them into a spreadsheet and we tracked them. But really, we would rip off the top after photocopying and give it back to the paramedic. But there was no statistics that were tracked. Now, if we saw a trend, we would cape them on the side, but really kind of going back and forth. Now, on the right-hand side, we had our infrequent skills. The reason why we had that is because we were required to report off on any of these. So it was, synchronized cardioversion. I know that everyone's kind of thinking CPAP is an infrequent skill. It was in 2012. So advanced airway, it's kind of cool to see how EMS has evolved. Needle crike, pre-existing vascular access device, IO, and needle thoracostomy. So you can see those were those areas that we focused on. Now, then we had some cardiac arrest and respiratory arrest sections, was witnessed by standard CPR. When I kind of was preparing for this PCR or this program or the PowerPoint for this, I was like, we only really focused on 5 things at the high level. And I was like, you think about now with the cardiac arrest, the CARES registry, even the NEMSIS elements from 3.4 to 3.5, there's a lot more detail, but it's kind of interesting to go back in the past. So the question I asked was, how has this process evolved? And I shared the screen with a bunch of clients and a bunch of colleagues and said, okay, tell me how we have evolved in EMS. Tell me how we have moved forward and, we're doing a better job. And the consistent answer I got from everyone was we went from paper to electronic reviews. And I'm like, did the questions change? Did we change anything in the process other than went from electronic to paper? Or sorry, paper to electronic. And people are like, maybe, probably not. So that's an area where we've really kind of focused on here at Image Trend is how can we optimize this? Now, before people get upset, we did not take away the regular reviews. That's still happening. There's just a way to automate those and make them more efficient. People do love their kind of standard reviews. Those aren't going anywhere. I think the industry will always have that, but is there a way that we can take people to the next level and automate a lot of this so that your time is focusing on other areas we can improve on? So how can we do better? Automating the process. So something that we like to do and we like to encourage a lot of our clients to do is build out CQI rules. And then part of CQI rules, it's kind of doing CQI by exception, is it allows you to go in there and say, okay, instead of me having to ask someone to read and see if there's 2 sets of vowel signs required, let the system do it. Hey, look, there's only 1 set of vowel sign, flag it, then put it in a bucket to review. If someone gave morphine, fentanyl, and Versed all together, I want those flagged and put them in a bucket for review. So instead of having that manual process where someone's going through that left-hand checkbox and going in there and be like 2 sets of vowel signs, is let the system do a lot of this and automate a lot of this for you. You can see I have Nemesis 3.5 on here. It's coming down the road. We should all be excited. A lot more better data elements for data standardization. But this is another opportunity to say, okay, instead of doing these paper manual reviews, is there a way that we can optimize this and do things a little bit easier and more efficient? Now, these rules can be complex. This right here was looking at basically when Node 12 lead was acquired with suspected ACS. So I really went in here and I shared this rules with a lot of our clients. I call it the dartboard approach. If I was a paramedic and I wanted to document something without documenting it the right way, I know, shocker, I know all of us just probably just fell to the ground that someone found a loophole in our industry. How could I do it? And I really focus on, I call it the dartboard approach, is I try to figure out every possible way to document a cardiac arrest, chest pain, ACS patient without choosing any of our normal fields. Okay, I don't want them to document the complaint chest pain. I want to document the primary impression or secondary impression. Is there a way I can look at medications, procedures, symptoms? Usually if there's a 12 lead, that's a good indication versus if they're giving nitro or aspirin, is you can start kind of circling back and finding that route. So some of these rules can add a lot of layers. I'm looking at procedures. I'm looking at contact times. It just gives you a lot of ways to make sure that you're getting that data. This process alone could be a CQI process. Think about cardiac arrest documentation. You want to make sure you're getting all that data, especially if you're participating in the CARES registry, the cardiac arrest registry. So some people don't put cardiac arrest as a primary and secondary impression. Could you look at, and they, for some reason, didn't fill out the cardiac arrest, yes, prior to or during the event? Okay, can we look at interventions? Epi, 1 to 10,000. Can we look at defibrillation? Can we look at other things they did to elude back that the primary impression or the cardiac arrest field should be yes? A lot of our solutions, a lot of vendors are doing this now that kind of helps them steer their documentation, make sure you're getting the most correct and most reliable data. Do you have a spot for your clinicians to engage with you? 3 simple questions is, do you want them to review? Do you want this chart to be reviewed? It's not punitive, and say, hey, this is a weird case. I want this reviewed. Follow-up requested. I want follow-up on outcome. I hope this question will disappear in the next few years of EMS. Hopefully we'll never get to the point where someone has to ask for outcome data. They should receive outcome data automatically. And then a case study. This one's a great one. I encourage you guys to have this on your run forms or in your program now. Let a crew member indicate that, hey, look, this is a great indication for a case study. Something on this call was unique, and it should be reviewed by other people. Another great opportunity. Now, you can see in our system, none of these questions are required to have that blue background. So it's not required that they fill it out, but it gives them an approach to say, hey, something weird happened on this call. I like follow-up. Or, hey, can you review this? Gives them that buy-in to that culture and say, hey, I want to improve my care. I want to improve my medicine. Let's look at this. Other things you can automate this is looking at your validation rules. In our system, everyone wants to get to 100%. So that's the goal, meets all the rules that agencies define. And you can see that we have actually automated this. So we don't want you spending time looking at what rules people are not completing. We don't want you to have to go through each record. Let's make things easier for your CQI personnel so they can focus on other areas and improve that patient care. So you can see right here how many records are at 100%, 96.5%. Well, 5.9, we'll go a little bit specific details. Now you can go in there and say, let's look at these other ones, the outliers. Kind of that same area is what rules are not being completed, okay? So as we kind of look at this and we say, okay, what rules are not being done? And now you can say, okay, it looks like systolic blood pressure criteria is not being met, mechanism, and that's 15%. So why is this not being met? Is it a bad rule? I'm gonna let you know first of the time, it's probably a bad rule, and kind of taking a step back. Now there's a question that came in the chat that is something that's near and dear to my heart. The question that came in is, do you review electronic narratives? This is something that here at ImageTrend that we have actually applied this technology to some of our solutions, where it's actually looking at the narrative and using AI to identify treatment, procedures, medications, and identifying those and say, hey, these weren't documented inside the actual procedure grid. Let's pull this out and identify this. Now, the current practice for this and the need is more for that determining, you know, is it a BLS emergent process? Is this a BLS emergent, or is this ALS or ALS 1 or ALS 2? But applying that logic going forward is key. And I can see that AI and kind of that machine learning is really what's coming into EMS and it's changing our documentation. So I get the great opportunity here at ImageTrend to work on our innovations team and looking at new technology and new products and really kind of finding that use. And that's something we've been exploring with Microsoft the last couple of years. It's amazing technology. And definitely check us out. It will be at EMS World and other conferences where we kind of highlight that technology and show you what that is. Like, we'll be at AAA this coming up weekend too, and just ask to see it. It's just kind of really cool how we can take what is being documented and now verify that. And that's freeing up a lot of time as well. Benchmarks. There's set organizations that have set great benchmarks for EMS agencies. You know, Mission Lifeline, the National EMS Quality Alliance, some states like California's core measures in there is how do you apply that logic and really move forward? And I look at example like this. So this National Quality Alliance measure. Why make you go in there and run the numerator and denominator? Let your system do that for you. Free up your users. Free up the time it takes to do those metrics. And so you can focus on other things. We're talking about automating a lot of that historical CQI. Now, these benchmark organizations, we're going to go back, are great things to participate in. I encourage you, if you're saying, hey, I'm looking for a CQI initiative, I'm starting off from scratch, I want to do something, check those out. The National EMS Quality Alliance are great ones. Mission Lifeline. If you're not in California, but the California core measures, that's still available. The original EMS Compass ones. They're great or areas to start a CQI initiative. And I wouldn't say, hey, we're going to hit all of them at once. Pick one or two and focus on that. Get to the kind of the benchmark they're establishing, and then focus on the next one. And just keep on circling back so you can keep on going back and forth. This is the California core measures one, just another one. This one's looking at glucose testing for suspected stroke patients. You know, the goal is 100%. You can see in February we hit it, but we haven't hit it since then. We have a slight decline. And this is actually an example of where they did a CQI initiative late last year. In 2021, they did a CQI initiative, really focused on blood glucose testing for all stroke patients. And what happened is you can start seeing in April, May, June, and you could be like, oh, 99, 98. In September, they hit 94%. So looking at that Hawthorne effect, and so I followed up with this organization and said, hey, it looks like your numbers are dropping. And they're like, oh yeah, we haven't focused on it. We haven't brought it up in our monthly calls, our quarterly. You can start seeing that decline. So that gives you a great opportunity to be like, okay, we need to refocus on this by maybe even just putting out a simple, hey, reminder. It gets out there really quick. Electronic CQI review, I told you we're going to get back to this, is really just making sure that you have the capability of communicating and looking at that information. One thing for me is when you think about CQI, permission is kind of key. If you're looking at a CQI topic that might be related to an individual, making sure that you're not sharing that information globally, it's protected in the environment. Having those questions that relate to the topic is key too. I showed you that paper form. That paper form was static. It didn't change if I was looking at cardiac arrest, if I was looking at another area. So making sure you're kind of looking at that information back and forth. Feedback and comments. I'm going to show you some cool stuff that we are working on, but just making sure that you have that bi-directional connection in a secure fashion. Here's a CQI bucket I built for chest pain and STEMI patients, in ensuring that everyone's there. So I have 4 cases I need to review. It's pretty transparent. You can set the number of reviewers in our system. Sometimes people want 2 reviewers, and you can determine if it's going to be a blind review, as in there's no clinician information, there's no patient information. It's just strictly looking at what occurred. Now, just disclosure, all our data is randomly generated incidents. So the narrative may not make sense. It's a tool that we have so we can have some fake data in our system. All of our locations are fast food restaurants. They change every year to different chains. There's no, you may see some information here that looks weird because you see 17 years and the narrative says 58. So just randomly generated incidents. So on the left-hand side, there's a set of questions. Now, this can be key. The question should match the topic. Get rid of the paper forms, get rid of those standard questions. Maybe the questions do apply to everyone, but really make it dynamic and make it pertaining to the incident. I'm going to go back a slide. A very common question is, well, what should I look at? Look at your systems of care. Look at your cardiac arrest, your STEMIs, your traumas, but maybe set rules and say, okay, these are the protocols. I only want to review the exceptions. If you have lesser use skills, obviously you want to check those or infrequent skills. Something that I like to do was new paramedics. We created a bucket. We assigned the bucket to their FTO, and we made them be responsible for our peer review. And you can report on their status and be like, hey, you have 15 charts you haven't reviewed. And that was a part of their duty to say, hey, you trained a paramedic, you've gone through the process, you're going to do either a 100% audit or a random audit of their charts and provide them feedback. So they have that coaching to keep them going forward, making sure those new employees meet that standard. We talk about workforce retention, that inviting feeling to say, hey, look, they actually care about me. They just didn't kick me on the road and say, here you go, have fun. Because it's, hey, we're going to follow up, we're investing in you. We want to improve your skills. That's all those kind of nice comforts of having that continuation. Now you think about it, I know some agents do 100% chart for the first month and they get reduced to 75 for the next 3 months, 50, and they kind of decrease from there. This gives you the opportunity to kind of adjust and really play into your needs of your operations. This is a CQI exemption, so you can see that I require 2 sets of vital signs. I flagged one of the times this got pulled into the system because the standard was 2 sets. So instead of me having to go look at a bunch of records, the system's automating a lot of the CQI for me. These are examples of questions. You can see I'm in the chest pain STEMI category, and I'm selecting out of my library, which I can add more questions, what's pertinent to this scenario. And when I report off of it, I can report off of that question per a category. So I may have the same question, was all procedures documented correctly in 5 different buckets. I can report on each of them independently. Automating notifications to your clinicians. If I change a record, say, hey, this needs work, let the system email them. Let the system contact them. Let the system handle all that for you. Free up your time. How much time do you spend getting employees to do their job? As in, like, do an addendum. Is this record not complete? Take that all over your hands and focus on other initiatives. So this is all about automating. On the right-hand side, this is a feature in our system that allows you to have a bi-directional conversation with your clinician in our CQI module. So they're logged into incident, they're in a read-only version, they can't make any changes, and they can see their scores. Hey, was information documented properly? Yes, you can see those scores. If I added a comment on the screen, I'll go back a couple. I add a comment, that comment displays to the clinician. And I can have a secure conversation about the care provided in a CQI format so that I can get that information. They feel that they're valued, they're getting the information, they're getting education, and you can improve that connection bi-directionally. So really kind of nice feature that you can report off of all that stuff. And then reporting off the data. When I went back to my questions real quick, how often are people following protocols? Is that 90%, 80%? Report off of that data. Identify your users that may have challenges. If you're doing a peer review or someone's coming up for their 90-day evaluation, go back into the system and say, how often are they not meeting the standard? And is there a trend? Is there opportunity to provide them with a personal improvement plan or some coaching to get them to the next level? So data is going to be key. Near real-time individual statistics. To me, this is what's changing EMS. Think about CQI. We're going to automate a lot. Have a user log in and see their own scorecard. Now, I don't like the word report card because you're usually one of two kids in the world. You either loved your report card or you hated your report card. So I like the word scorecard. Some other people use different words, but have them log in and say, okay, I'm into the system. What's my vascular access success rate? Looking at Q2, I'm at 90%. The company's at 75. Yay, I'm over the company standard. You know, in Q3, I'm at 84.62%. Goes in there. Looks like I disconnected one IV. Now, it doesn't have to look at vascular access. You can look at anything. You can look at, let me go back one. You can look at your dispositions. Do you have a higher cancel rate? Are you looking at airways? Are you looking at trauma procedures? And on this one, I just zoomed in a little bit so you guys can see kind of the table a little bit better. So top is the clinician, the bottom is the organization. So providing those stats to see how am I performing compared to other paramedics in the same organization. Am I a high performer, low performer? Now this may shock everyone. Paramedics tend to be type A. They're competitive. They want to be the best. So providing those individual scorecards really motivates someone to keep on moving forward. So this is another area. I like looking at this. This is the dispositions. What's my cancel rate? So this user right here works quick response vehicle. So you can see they have a pretty high canceled prior to arrival. I wouldn't, 80 of their calls in Q2, 48 on Q3, and the company's average is 9%. So they're a little bit higher at 37, makes sense for the job, but it gives you those insights where they can see, okay, am I releasing too many people? Am I canceling too many people? How many cardiac arrests I have? We have one on age and gender. We have a couple organizations that base their annual training based upon, okay, are you going to do OB training because you had less than 5 deliveries this year? So you can actually start getting that information out of the system to steer your education. And so you can see, I zoomed this in a little bit and cropped it, but you can see their accounts versus the entire organization. So their transport rates less than 50%, but they're also jumping on a secondary transport unit as needed in this example. So you can quickly identify where we are. Also, it's important to use our organization have those numbers too. What is our refusal rate? What is our resuscitation rate on scene? Get that stats in there, know that information, and see where you guys can improve in. And then, we did a survey with the clients that are using some of this feature, and they're saying that their clinicians are reviewing the scorecards often. The most interesting thing that we found, and they found too, was the count of procedures increased while the call volume remained consistent. So that's kind of the interesting part is, okay, why is that? And you think about that competitive environment. People are like, oh, you missed that IV, you better go document that. I saw you do that. And then we're finding that less procedures are being documented in narrative because that same competitiveness to say, hey, you need to make sure you document that. Now, I will disclosure, some of your stats may go down. People thought their stats were much higher, but now people are documenting all attempts. And some of our clients are like, oh, we're actually not doing that well. It's not that they're suddenly not doing well. It's just now they have better and accurate data. So near real-time insights, this is kind of, now I'm looking at the same capabilities and thinking about data-driven CQI. This is really what we want to get to, is I'm looking at IO access. Just something that we were looking at, kind of drilling through and saying, okay, let's look at who's getting IOs. That's a great area. And I was looking at, and I was like, okay, look at the cardiac resuscitation. So 92.54%. That's great. Then I'm going in here and I'm like, respiratory lower airway, why did we start an IO on that patient? Then you kind of go in here and look at some other areas. You're like, okay, is there the best opportunity that you can go in there? Is there opportunity to change this and maybe gain some more insights? Hypotension, what was that blood pressure? Maybe we drill in and take a better look in there. And this is just the same thing, kind of larger, so you can kind of see it. I kind of cut the columns there so you can see the attempts. So looking at cardiac arrest, 67 patients, 67 attempts, 62 were successful. That's great. I looked into, we had an obvious death. We were unsuccessful in the obvious death. The column on the right shows you what the baseline. So the baseline is 88%. It's basically identifying if a particular primary impression, you can also look by clinician, is above or below that benchmark. And so looking at, cardiac arrest, it's at the highest area. But this is actually where we went down this rabbit hole, okay? So we went down this rabbit hole and kind of trying to identify some of the areas. We said, okay, so if they're starting IOs, how many people are getting IVs? So we looked at the IV documentation. And so 42.7% of patients had an IV attempted versus IO. So we went back and forth and we said, okay, let's kind of drill into this and identify some other areas. And said, why is that? If you have such a great success with IO and cardiac arrest, why is there almost half of the patients getting IOs or IVs? And we went back to this organization, we talked, and it was quite interesting. Their policy, their protocol said that they start IVs over IO. But what happened was they did a protocol adjustment. That line fell to the second page. They only printed page 101. So that caveat line fell off of their protocols. So paramedics changed. They're like, oh, this is no longer a requirement. I guess I'll start an IV first. Now we're all in the industry, we know the cost of IO needles. It feels like 67 were started. You're probably buying 3 times that amount monthly. Not sure where they go. I think they fall in a black hole. But kind of looking at this, is there opportunity for improvement? The interesting thing that we found also was, regardless of the method, most times there's only one attempt documented. And we verified the data multiple times, and it's like, are we not documenting second attempts? So it gives you more. Now we're asking those why. So now we have a lot more why questions. So was there a protocol issue? What was the contraindications? If I go back into looking at these areas, we had started foreign trauma patients. Was there an area that we could maybe adjust that? And then so we kind of started that research layer, and we started digging a little bit deeper. And we started, okay, let's look at etiology. So I'm looking at the etiology for second quarter, so same data range. And now I'm looking at presumed cardiac. There's some submersions, overdoses, electrocution, kind of looking at these reasons. I'm like, okay, now going back, and like, okay, and these are both for IO. So now I'm looking like, okay, let's go back and identify, some of these other areas. Is there an age group that's kind of starting them? So you can see right here, the age groups, and really you're just going to go down this rabbit hole. This is great. This is the stuff that now you're freeing up time to look, instead of looking at a random chart audit, that you could do other stuff, is realize, okay, do we have an issue with our cardiac arrest data that we may have never caught? This was just stumbled upon, was, okay, looking at IO versus IV, is how long would that have been in effect? So you really can go down this rabbit hole. Luckily, you can always get back up. And kind of going back and forth and really identifying those areas. And kind of what my final thoughts and some questions I'm going to take some time to answer too, is when we talk about continuous quality improvement, and we emphasize the quality healthcare outcomes, is in order to do CQI right, we have to have patient outcomes. Patient outcomes is key to the enhancement of ENS. And to keep on moving forward. It's something that we must have. Nemesis has done a great kind of position paper of PWW. There's a lot of documents out there saying, EMS has a right to patient outcomes. It's not a HIPAA violation. Now, on the left on the screen, this is the e-outcome section with NEMSIS 3.4. And I think this says a lot, is you can see the national state elements, a lot of them, everything else is really optional. There wasn't a huge emphasis. If you look for the NEMSIS 3.5 standards, which the states are starting to switch to it, it's another, we have about a year and 3 months before that becomes the complete standard for the US. You look at all those national elements, look what they're trying to get people to do is getting some basic information back to EMS. There's a connect-a-thon that's going on right now in the United States that's hosted by HIMSS and the IHE, which is integrating the healthcare enterprises. Cerner, Epic, all these major players are at this connect-a-thon right now, and there's PCR vendors there too, and they're building out a standard for EMS data. I'm so excited for this. It's a HL7 CDA file and a FHIR standard, which is how we move data back and forth. But they're building one out specifically for EMS. This hasn't been done before. And the goal here is to improve and get that outcome data back to EMS for every record. I know this is kind of my personal soapbox, but as we look at looking at outcomes and we look at CQI and we look at those initiatives and we look at the clinical, the medicine that our clinicians are doing, we have broken layers after layers of huge EMS advancements in EMS. And this is great, but the outcome data is going to be key to keep on moving forward. And yep, and that connect-a-thon is going on right now. I know that we have representatives there, a lot of vendors do, and that's going on. It's going to be key. So if you can get outcome data back, work with your vendor to do that is something that's becoming easier and easier now. If you asked probably about 3 or 4 years ago, there was going to be a lot of barriers and a lot of layers, but this is something that is becoming achievable for a lot of agencies. So I have my contact information up. I know there was a lot of questions. I do want to get to some of them. And if we don't get to them, we'll definitely follow up. A question about the narratives. And is there a limit? Or basically what the question is the narrative becoming more limited and more data-driven? In the industry, there is this kind of mixed emotion, and I'm going to stay very neutral on this, is the narrative really even needed these days? Now that everything's being documented in so many different NEMSIS fields and being brought over. And I think there is a value to the narrative. Absolutely, there's a value to painting that picture, how the patient was found, what was the scene conditions, et cetera. Where people get themselves in trouble, and this is where area that should be avoided, is that double documentation. Why are you repeating your vital signs inside your narrative? Let your vendor do that for you. Imatrend has a narrative templates that you as an organization set, and it populates pre-existing fields in the PCR into the narrative, and the crew member fills out those missing areas. That is what the narrative is really designed for. And the question is, who's using the narrative these days? Is a healthcare facility reading that narrative? Is that what they read? Is that just a kind of urban legend? And that's something that we are starting to do surveys on with hospitals and say, when you look at a PCR, what are you really looking at? And some of these survey results is coming in and says, hey, I just look at the narrative and the treatment real quick. We have other people says, hey, we just rely on the paramedic handoff. We have other agencies, facilities, people responding and saying, hey, we're just looking at the procedures and medications. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens to that narrative field as we keep evolving. Is that becoming more or less important? And I think that scene information is very important to paint that picture, but is there opportunities to steer people towards other areas for documentation? So that's just kind of, I think it's a great question. Thank you for asking that, and really kind of still painting that picture of where is the narratives going. And I think that's it. If anyone else has any questions. And it's just interesting that someone brought up about billing for the narratives too. It is interesting to see that, you know, the narrative does support billing, but a lot of billers now don't actually receive a physical copy of the PCR. Sometimes you do if you're billing for denial, but a lot of those other interesting layers are there. Are they actually getting a copy of the PCR? In a lot of cases, no. So it does paint a picture, it definitely helps. And then now that with AI and other technology, I think that in populating those narratives, and helping the paramedic document just that pertinent information is going to free up a lot of time. The other thing too is a good CQI initiative that you may not be able to make changes on is how long does it take your clinician to document a record? You know, I know image trend, we have timestamps in our report writer that looks from the time chart was created to the time those marked as finished. That's a derivative field you can find in report writer. Looking at those metrics. Now, what I would suggest for you as an organization to be very careful about is make sure that you put the primary impression before that. So if you're looking at time metrics, it's going to take longer to document a working cardiac arrest than maybe a simple abdominal pain that you took to the hospital, or maybe a general weakness call. So looking at those layers and then looking at the response mode and the patient acuity will be key. And really having 3 buckets. And I suggest people look at your routine calls, your moderate to sick people, and then your critical calls, and looking at those layers and identify with your workforce. The key thing is with your workforce is going back and saying, okay, is there an opportunity for us to improve things? Now, the first thing your workforce is going to be like, can we get rid of half the nemesis fields? That's once you get past that, you'll make good progress. But it'd be like, you'd be shocked. Some people are like, can you move this field over here? It makes more sense over here. Or I don't really need these fields. Can you just hide them until they become pertinent? And you'll see those areas of good opportunities there to improve. And my screen, my contacts here. No sounds. If you guys need some example for some narrative templates, feel free to reach out. We share those among our library clients as well, so you can see that. And I think that's it. I'd like to thank everyone and for attending this today. I'd like to thank Pinnacle as well for allowing us opportunity to talk about this today.
All right. Well, thank you, Doug, for that great presentation. A lot of really good information in there. As a reminder, I saw the question in a couple of areas today. The slides will be available and the presentation will be available. You'll be able to visit our website, www.ems.com. I'd like to thank today's sponsors of the event. Thank you very much, Image Trend and Doug, for providing this great content. Thank you to our learning partner, Ninth Brain, and to the Pinnacle webinar series, which is produced in cooperation with the premier media partner, EMS One. One final reminder for those looking for the next Beyond the Streets opportunity, BTS does have 2 upcoming workshops, September 29th and 30th in Leavenworth, Washington, and one November 3rd and 4th in Arnold, Missouri, near St. Louis. Registration is still open for both workshops, so go to fitchassociates.com for more information or to register. Be sure to join us for next month's webinar, Cases from the Fitch Files. This is an extension of one of our most popular Pinnacle sessions, and we hope you'll be able to join us. The webinar will be October 18th at 1 p.m. Central. You can register at www.pinnacle-ems.com. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Y'all be safe out there.